Welcome to the Kansas City Business Cast, where I assemble a cast of entrepreneurs here in the Kansas City region to tell their stories about what they do, why they do it, what they wish they would have known when they got started, so that you can learn as a listener what it's like being an entrepreneur out here. Today's guest is a very special guest. Full disclosure, she is my wife. You might have gathered that from the podcast title, but she is Stephanie Reisinger. She runs Hopeful and Whole Counseling and does so many more things that I'm going to have her tell you all about today. Before we get into the interview, I hate to be that guy, but if you could like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, and kindly leave us a review after this episode, we would thoroughly appreciate it. Without further ado, Stephanie Reisinger, tell us about yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Well, like you said, I run Hopeful and Whole Counseling. I am a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist, and I've been in practice I've been a therapist for 15 years. I've been sort of in and out of my own private practice, a total of 8-9 years maybe. And Hopeful and Whole Counseling has been what I've been doing specifically for the last 2.5 years. And I specialize in perinatal mental health, which is working with women and their families going through challenges related to pregnancy, postpartum, infertility, loss, parenthood, all the things connected there.
So awesome to have you here. Just hearing you tell the quick recap of the last 15 years of your career, I've been there with you through it all, obviously. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this interview we're about to do is that this is not your first podcast. Mm-hmm. You've been interviewed multiple times. You actually ran your own podcast at some point.
I did.
Which may be resurrected one day. We'll see if that happens. But this is the first time that somebody's actually sat you down and will be asking you about all of the business elements of what you do, why you do it, how you're successful doing it, which I think is so important for so many people in your space, people that genuinely want to help people, but don't necessarily have the background of how to, make a business out of that. And usually folks are working for other practices, or they're working for state or government entities. Nonprofits are huge in this space. And I think what's interesting about you is that you've found a way to learn how to do marketing, learn how to do sales. You've got some operational components. You have had to learn this on the go, which I think, and I hope that this will be inspirational not only for Kansas City therapists, but people outside of our city as well that might be tuning into this, so they know what it's like to actually build a practice on your own. So I'm really excited to get into that today. Maybe you should start by actually telling folks why you got into the field that you're in and why you focus on the population of women that you do.
Yeah, it's a good question because I have worked with many different populations. I used to want to work specifically with kids, and I spent a lot of years working with kids, which was a great experience to have. And over time, just realized that wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. And that's wonderful for those who are able to specialize in that area. For me, it felt, I think, more taxing than anything. It is a lot of work to work with kids because you're working with the whole family, the whole system. And so, along the journey, which you're familiar with, but not everybody is, that along my journey of becoming a therapist, we were also going through several years of infertility, experienced some losses.
You and me.
Yep, that's us. And, once we got over sort of that hurdle, I don't have a better term for it, but then I felt I was in a space to be able to help others experiencing infertility and loss. And then also, though, after our first child, I experienced some postpartum anxiety and depression. And so then once moving through that, realized how interconnected all of these things are and found myself really wanting to be able to help women in going through that experience as well. And so that's where I started to specialize in perinatal mental health and have been doing the work to specialize in that for about 3.5 years.
So very interesting as I hear you speak. Again, all these emotions and memories come up, and I think about how disruptive it is when you are a professional and then you have to focus on growing a baby human being and then having that baby. And maybe we'll get into that at some point too, of the timeline of when we had our kids and the years, because there was a year in particular that was pretty rough for the entire world there. But, you know, when you said I've been doing this for about 3.5 years, that really put it into focus for me. How did you get your start? What was that first year like? You know, maybe you could tell folks as well about your journey to doing this here in Kansas City while you're at it, because it's your story to tell, so I'm not going to tell the story.
Sure.
It's up to you.
We started in California, and then moved here in. I got here first, the end of 2014, and then Michael came in January of 2015. And so I didn't have a license in Kansas or Missouri at the time. I had a license in California, and it took me a couple of years to actually be able to then obtain my license here. And so I was doing different kinds of work in the interim. But I did get licensed in Missouri first and then in Kansas. And as far as, you know, the last 3.5 years and specializing in this area, I had the privilege of being able to work for the sort of premier perinatal mental health specialty practice here in Kansas City. And that was in 2020. So that was a crazy sort of year going into coming out of maternity leave and starting at a new practice in a new specialty with a new baby. And then 2 weeks after starting that, the world shut down and we're all sent home. And so that was really trial by fire in a lot of ways of trying to figure out, you know, the best ways to support other women in this exceptional time. It was exceptionally difficult for new moms to be so isolated, to not have the help and support that they needed. And then also to be going through that myself. Like I'm, privileged enough, lucky enough, blessed enough to have had some tools at my disposal to have known how to try and support myself during that time. It was still hard, but I didn't experience a lot of the level of anxiety or depression that so many other women did during that time. But also, again, it was hard. And then also supporting women through that. But I did have a very supportive team that I was a part of as well. And that made a huge difference in being able to, I think, be successful during that time.
Absolutely. We're going to continue talking about that as well. But I think one important part of what you just said was you said, I was lucky, blessed, fortunate enough to have some tools at my disposal. And that is something that I know, if we're using the analogy of tools, you've been honing, sharpening, blacksmithing, like building over the last 15 years, right? And so maybe you could tell us about your education. You mentioned trial by fire being the method by which you needed to learn how to do this here. But there were a lot of things along the way that prepared you for this. So maybe when you said tools, maybe we can go back in there and classify that as, education, skills, knowledge, abilities, things you picked up over time. Can you tell us about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, part of it was having been through a postpartum period before. And so I had my first experience, which like I had said was really very difficult. And I had learned from that experience and did a lot of work during my pregnancy then with our second daughter. I did a lot of work to try and set myself up for success during the second postpartum period. And so really, for example, just made sure I asked for help, asked for support, made sure we had like freezer meals available and had a meal train and people coming to bring us meals. And I had professionals that I was connected with, like a wonderful friend who is a lactation consultant who was super helpful, and a pediatric physical therapist who ended up needing help from. And, so I had learned from that previous experience that I can't do it all on my own, and nor should I have to, and did my best to then set up support for the second time around.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm thinking about that as well. I remember one moment in particular. There was a really nice lady from a local Facebook page that was, volunteering breast milk that had surplus of. And that's one of the things too. I think people, hopefully we're not causing any flashbacks or anything from 2020, but supply chain was all messed up, and there was a lot of uncertainty there. And so I think, we did learn, sorry, I'm inserting myself into your story.
Well, you're in it.
But there was a lot of lessons learned from having our first baby and then going in. So I think, the lesson from that is never waste a perfectly good crisis in your history. I know that's probably an overquoted statement, but everything that we've lived through makes us stronger. People, professionals, community members, all of that. And I think, that is definitely part of your why. I think as a person who practices in your field, you've been through it yourself. So you have this unique qualification. And again, it's like being part of a club that you never signed up for, but you kind of did because you had a baby. But I think it's important that you're helping other people. So that's great. So you talked about working for the foremost women's, how would you describe that in Kansas
I said
City?
the premier perinatal mental health practice in Kansas City.
I knew I was butchering it.
That's
okay.
all right.
So you got your start there, and I know the pandemic caused a lot of like remote work, remote appointments, and all of a sudden people can't meet in person. So tell me about your journey from there into, going in as an entrepreneur and starting your own practice.
Yeah, well, that's a good reminder about the whole trial by fire thing, is going to remote telehealth. That was something I had never done before, and it was very awkward at first. It was really unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And over time, obviously, I learned how to do things a little bit differently than I would with an in-person session, so that it could be just as effective. And now that's just a regular part of my practice, which I just never imagined it would be before. And so I'd say about half of the sessions I do are virtual still, because it's just a normal thing, which 4 years ago it was not. And then the other half are in person. And let me see, where did I start that with as far as...
I asked you to start off with being there still with that practice.
Oh, right. And then I ended up transitioning.
What was your transition to becoming, on your own?
Yeah. And so, we had a lot of trouble securing really good childcare during that time, that we would, had 3-4 childcare situations fall through. And so it was really challenging then to be able to meet the demands of that particular practice. And so after being there a year, we mutually agreed that I would move on, and that made it so that I could have my own hours, create my own schedule, meet the needs of our family while continuing my practice. And so it was not a thing that I had planned to do. I thought like I would be with this other group practice for a long time. But I am actually incredibly grateful for the way that went, because it's been fantastic to be able to build. It's been fantastic to be able to build my own thing, to be able to brand the way that I want to, and to, for the messaging of my marketing and my social media to be my voice and reflect my values. And that's just been it's been really, really cool. And now, we haven't had childcare issues since. And so I've been able to transition over time to working full time and really growing this practice well, and even bring on an intern.
That was so awesome. So many ideas are swirling in my head, obviously, because I've been there with you. But I'm just thinking about how you started your business. So, if people look at you now, they'll see you got a website, you got an Instagram presence, you got all this, and we'll share that in the show notes here. But there's a story of how you built all of that and why you called your business what you called it. And so let's start there, and then we'll see where that goes.
Okay, so how I built that Hopeful and Whole. Yeah. So where that started was, like you mentioned, I had a podcast. So back when we were still going through infertility, I started a podcast. It was called the Holistic Fertility and Wellness Podcast. And that was a really fun experience. That was very cool that I interviewed people from all over the world with various stories, various expertise related to fertility, conception, pregnancy. And I learned a ton from that. I had such a great time. And when I was doing that, I also started to then create some of my own business sort of ideas out of it. And one of the things that I created was an ebook, and it was called Hopeful and Whole. And it was about navigating the journey of fertility challenges. And so that idea of being both hopeful and whole at the same time is what really resonates with me, in that when we're hopeful, especially when we're thinking about infertility, for example, you're in a place of there's this temptation to think that you're incomplete somehow. I don't have my child yet, the child that I want. And so you're trying to be hopeful. And at the same time, it's so important to know that when you have that child does not complete you. You are already whole right now. And so it's wonderful to finally have your child. It's a beautiful thing. And at the same time, it doesn't change your worth as a human being. You're already whole, before, after, during, all of those things.
That was wonderful. Quick question, rhetorical for me, but not for people listening. Mm-hmm. Did we have kids when you started your podcast?
We did not.
And we talked about that, right? What did we talk about?
You mean back then?
Yeah, what was your thought process to start a podcast about fertility while we were going through infertility?
Yeah, well, because I had already started to learn so many things along the way, because we had chosen not to go the medical route. And so there was a lot that I had to learn. People who go through medical route have a lot to learn too, but just about different things. And so there was a lot that I had to learn about supporting one's body, about nutrition, about movement, about your emotional health, all of these things that I was learning along the way. And I thought, gosh, at the time, it was difficult for me to come across this information. And so I wanted to create a space where other women could more easily find that information.
Absolutely. And so as you discern the name, Hopeful and Whole, maybe you can tell us about your thought process for the marketing and what avenues, because you just said it, you hit the nail on the head. These resources they didn't exist, or they were hard to find. They weren't popular, not in immediate focus. We're talking 2015, 16?
16. So we're looking at 7-8 years ago is when I was running the podcast.
So up to that point, though, maybe you can tell us about your journey in, sales, marketing, the other things that you were learning while you were getting your education and experience as a mental health educator and professional, and kind of tell us about all that business stuff, the operation stuff that you learned about.
Yeah, it's really cool because I had, I'll back up a little bit.
Sure.
Grad school teaches you absolutely zero about running a business, which is understandable because not everybody who becomes a therapist is going to go into private practice. It would be nice if that was an option, maybe, to take those classes in grad school, but still, you don't learn anything about business in graduate school. And so when you go into private practice, you have to learn absolutely everything. And especially early on, when you're not making any money, you have to be the person who does all the things. And it is a lot of work, and it's difficult to balance all of that stuff on top of the clinical work, obviously, which is a lot of work. I'll say I had the benefit of the privilege of having some other business experiences. I was in network marketing for a while, and I learned so much about sales, about marketing, about...
Can you give us some nuggets of wisdom too, as you're going through there, like an example of something you learned?
Yeah. One big example of something that I've learned is to value your work. And so a lot of therapists are nervous about charging what they're worth because they don't want to be inaccessible to people, which is a reasonable thought. Absolutely. But when you value your work, your clients value the work as well. When they are making a real investment, then they are going to participate more in their own healing. And so what happens when you charge what you're worth for a session is you're able to pay your bills. You're able to focus more on the actual work itself rather than stressing out about whether or not you can pay the rent in your office. And you also have the ability then to offer some reduced fee spots or even some pro bono spots, But if you're offering a lower rate to everybody so that it's accessible to everybody, then you end up having to work more, to earn less, to not be able to pay your bills. And this principle is really something that I learned in network marketing, is to value your time, to value your work.
Absolutely. So I stopped you while you were talking about the sales training. So what about the marketing experience that you got and formal training? Things of that nature. Yeah.
So, I had mentioned that I didn't have a license when I first got here to Kansas. And so I was doing different types of work. And so I worked for a year with friends of ours who owned a small business doing metal refinishing for buildings. They do metal refinishing, wood refinishing, polishing floors, those kinds of things. And I worked as an office manager there. And while I was an office manager there, they sent me to this amazing marketing training with StoryBrand, Donald Miller, for those who are familiar. And this was in 2015, I believe. Yeah, 2015. And so he was still leading all of the StoryBrand marketing trainings. And there were, I want to say, maybe 30 of us in this group. And so it was just this really awesome experience to be able to work directly with Donald Miller and his team and learn about marketing from them. And I was able to take that back to this business that I was working for at the time and sort of train them on what I have learned. And at the same time, take all of that knowledge myself that I learned to be able to use then in my private practice marketing.
Absolutely. And just a plug there, that is KC Restoration. Amazing people that run that organization. And just very interesting that you got to have that time with Donald Miller. I remember we were freaking out about that. All our friends were freaking out about it. And can you tell us a little bit about how you've applied what you learned in that class with him and StoryBrand? I I believe everyone's been giving me a hard time about this, that I haven't gone through Business Made Simple yet, but that's what he calls it now, right? Okay.
Yeah,
So-
he still has Story Brand. I believe that Story Brand is still the marketing end
Okay.
of that.
All right.
I'm
Well,
not 100% certain.
Sorry for that little squirrel thought there. I'll dismiss that one. But what was something that you learned when you said it was very valuable? You took it back to the business and then,
Yeah, the
brought
most
it into your own
important component of the way that he teaches marketing is that you want to make the person, the customer or client that you're marketing to, the hero in the story. They're the main focus, and to help them see, imagine a picture of where it is they're wanting to be. And so a lot of times companies make the mistake of making themselves the center of it. Look how awesome we are. Look how amazing we are. And that does work sometimes and to an extent, but the customer or client wants to be able to imagine, how will my life be better, and what is my participation in making my life better if I use this service or product. And that's the big shift. And so where that's shown up for me is especially like in the hopeful and whole theme within that title, is I am focusing on what the client will experience. If they use my services, what they're going to experience, that they will be hopeful and they will also feel whole, after we've done our work together.
Absolutely. Just awesome lessons there in knowing your value as a therapist and making the people you help and you serve the heroes of the story. That is so powerful. And I hope every person out there just heard that. I hope that there's a lot of therapists that will end up listening to this to hear you talk about that. So powerful. So here we are, hopeful and whole. You get your start. Tell us about the beginnings, right? So I kind of paused there to talk about, your education and your background and your experience. Tell me about the beginning, when you got the logo made. How'd you do that? How'd you set up your website? Tell us about all the logistics of getting started. Maybe there's someone out there right now that's like, oh, this is so awesome, I want to start my own practice. Mm-hmm. How did you get your start?
Yeah, well, it's interesting how much has changed. So when I first got my license in 2016 and started my private practice initially here in Kansas, it was very, very different from starting up again in 2021. So I did, the three years in private practice, sort of working under the umbrella of another company, of Renew Counseling Center, who I gladly plug as well because they're awesome, in Olathe. And but it was still my own private practice. But I didn't have my own website at the time. I didn't have electronic health records. I didn't have much of a social media presence. I was just kind of going off of word of mouth, passing out business cards, networking, those kinds of things, and did okay. But so much has changed. By the time I went through 2020 with this other counseling group, and then in 2021 starting Hopeful and Whole, it was like, oh no, I have to have my own website. I have to have a social media presence. You can't, I mean, maybe you can, but it's going to be really tough to be successful without having those things. People need a place to land, to learn some things about you before they make a decision about you. And so, I hired a friend, Haley Williams, who is a web designer, to create my logo, which I absolutely love. And you and I worked on my website, which I don't love, but it is what it is because I don't...
Bootstrapping, baby.
Yeah. I mean, it works. It's functional. People go there and somehow they end up working with me. So
they click things, they fill stuff out,
yep,
and you
exactly.
get to see them.
And then, I've increased my social media involvement and presence as well. It's, it could be better. I've seen people who just really kill it on social media, and I still haven't managed to figure out how to post every day on social media and also do all of my regular work and, like pay attention to paying the bills for my practice and like do my notes and all those things. Like, I don't know how they managed to work that out.
Yeah. So two things, we'll talk about that too, but I think the operational component's important. And, this social media thing. I mean, this is not the social media we grew up with. Okay. So we're going to date ourselves a little bit.
Well,
but
yeah, we didn't grow up with any social media.
MySpace, not Pop, some of these older sites, the early beginnings of the Facebooks, and then Facebook came out, and then there was Instagram, and there's Twitter and LinkedIn. And, how do you find the right places to market your business? Okay. And I'm not asking for you to tell me what percentage of time do you spend in each, social media platform, but which ones do you use, and what sort of delivery systems do you think are the best? When I say delivery systems, I mean like, writing out posts, memes, reels, things like that. What's your social media strategy?
Gosh, I wish I had one. The biggest part of my strategy is to focus on one platform. I don't do anything on like any platform beyond Instagram. That's all I do. And that works really well for my demographic because, women in their 20s to 40s are the ones spending most of the time on Instagram. And so, there's a lot in that younger category are going to be on TikTok. And so I know there are a lot of therapists who post videos on TikTok that has been really helpful for a lot of people. TikTok doesn't make sense to me, but Instagram has been great. And I guess I do have a little bit of a strategy in that I try to sort of alternate between creating posts with text, and creating reels. I try and show up on stories because people like to see your face and hear your voice and get to know your personality. And so I do a bit of that as well.
So when we're talking about that, how people find you and they engage with you, where do your referrals come from? How do you find people to help?
Networking has been huge when it comes to referrals, finding other professionals who work with the same demographic but are not other therapists necessarily. So I connect a lot with other therapists, but they're trying to get the clients too. They're trying to fill their practices as well. And so what has been really helpful for me is to connect with lactation consultants, pediatric physical therapists, chiropractors, midwives, doulas, all of these other professionals who are working with pregnant and postpartum moms or those who are going through infertility or loss. And that's where I get a lot of my referrals, is through those sources. And then there are the people who just Google and find me that way.
What's kind of crazy is that, you listed off those professions, chiropractors and doulas and people that when we got to Kansas City, first off, you didn't know you were going to be doing this. You don't know where your path's going to go, but you have found your tribe here in this city. And so if folks are listening here, thinking about wondering if they have these people in their city, I think chiropractors and physical therapists, I think everybody knows about those folks, but some people don't even know what a doula is, or the difference between a doula and a midwife. It's funny you started talking about networking has been huge, because I was going to ask you, how do you network with people in Kansas City? You're talking about meeting all these people. How often do you go see them? How do you do that?
Yeah, you just have to be bold. And that's what I've done. I will learn about a new, maybe not new in general, but new to me, practice of some kind or professional of some kind, and reach out to them and, relate. We we serve the same demographic, we serve the same population. Would you like to meet for coffee and chat? And we talk about how we can support one another, and we learn from one another, learn about each other's styles, and make sure those things align and match up. And then, and then we could become a source of referrals for one another. And it's really relationship building, but it's being bold. I know that people can get nervous about reaching out to somebody they don't know, but I find 9.5 times out of 10, other small business owners are happy to meet up. Even though we're all busy, we want to be able to connect and support one another.
Being bold. How did you learn how to be bold? How do you do this? I have this unique, unfair advantage of knowing you since you were a little child. But what do you have to say to the introverts out there, or the ambiverts that are mostly introverts? However you want to break this down. Use any personality test in the book. I mean, you and I, we've talked about this a lot, personality isn't black and white. Like, people are not binary equations. We get that, but how do you encourage people to be bold? What is that journey to boldness and getting out there and knowing your value and connecting with people? What does that look like?
Yeah, as an introvert myself, I have had to learn this skill. And it's really a matter of learning to do things even if I'm nervous or anxious about it. It's, do the whole do it scared thing, or like John Wayne, it's a John Wayne quote, right? Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. That's what it is. So a lot of times we want to totally ease our fears, not feel nervous or whatever. And that's just not reality. I get nervous all the time. Anytime I'm going to meet with a new person, I get anxious about, am I going to say something weird or awkward, and that's fine as long as it doesn't keep me from doing the things that I need to do. And so I have learned over time that it really pays off to do things whether or not you're nervous about it.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. There's this overarching theme as well with your approach, and you even started to allude to it when you were talking about networking, but you talked about the various different people that you build these relationships with. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but your approach on healthcare and business as well is having, being connected to specialists in certain areas. You already said, I know I can't do this on my own. I'm a huge believer. People that get to know me know that I don't believe that there are any self-made men, any self-made women in business or anywhere. Everybody needs help somehow. Everybody learned something from another person, or learned by failing or whatever. But, what sort of business experts have you looked to or looked up to? Do you have mentors that you found in other professions that have helped you? You've borrowed maybe some tools or tricks or tips that they have that they've used in their business. How do you do that?
Do you mean like personal mentors or sort of virtual mentors, like, people
yes.
online or?
Yes. Which is like the new way to say both. But yeah, I mean, who's influenced you in networking and kind of building that bullpen of people?
Oh, gosh. Why does that suddenly feel like a hard question?
Probably because I had like 4 questions and I said one question.
I think I'm really inspired by just other women who have gone before me, essentially, because I do think I do things a little bit differently. Like I said, I have more of a holistic approach, which, for example, is why I connect more with midwives than I do with, say, an OB office. And there are a lot of perinatal mental health therapists who connect with OB offices, which is great. That's wonderful. We had 2 hospital births. And at the same time, I do connect more personally with the midwives and the doulas and the, those who just take a more holistic approach. And so I do think as I'm doing things a little bit differently here in the mental health world, I look to others who have gone before me who have done things a little bit differently. Aviva Ram is a medical doctor, midwife, and herbalist who is, I do not know her personally at all, but I find her very inspiring because of all of the work that she's done for women over the last 3 or so decades. And I think as far as business goes, Donald Miller is one who I really appreciate because he keeps things really simple, and that makes things really manageable and doable. Brendan Burchard is somebody who I find very inspiring. He knows a lot about psychology, so I connect with a lot of the things that he says. But he obviously is a very successful businessman as well, and so I pay attention to that. And so I'd say those are some of my main kind of what's the word? Not personal mentors, but sort of digital mentors. And then personally speaking, I'm just really inspired by the other practitioners in Kansas City, the other women that I know, like Amber Walla at Sacred Song Home Birth, starting this midwifery practice out of her own passion. And it's been so successful, and she's served so many women and babies and families in Kansas City over the years. And Stephanie Novacek with Well Bellies and Babies.
I was going to say. Mm-hmm.
Who has, again, served so many babies and families in really tough times. They're coming to her because something is not going well with their baby. There's some sort of issue like torticollis or issues with breastfeeding or a tongue tie or, all of these things. We don't go to a pediatric physical therapist because everything's perfect. There's always some sort of stressor, and she's just absolutely amazing at putting parents at ease and also just doing a really beautiful job. And so I'm just so inspired by these other women that I've connected with in this space who are serving families with integrity and also creating a successful business.
Absolutely. So there's another new business that you've partnered with, right? That you're a part of, Clinic Site. Because when you talked about, meeting people in person, where do you do that?
Oh, yes.
Thank you for recovering. I was getting really scared there. You guys can't see. I don't do video on this podcast yet, but I was
very confused for a second.
In the headlights. I was like, oh my gosh, please.
Yes. KC Wellnest. Oh, for goodness sake. Yes. So KC Wellnest is where I meet with clients currently. And that was started last year by 3 other amazing women in this space. So, Carissa Stanton, who is a pediatrician. She's a direct care pediatrician. And there is also a lactation consultant, IBCLC, Liz Levy there, and Cody Skinner, who is an occupational therapist, feeding specialist. And so this has been a really cool space to be a part of. Again, women who are just so excited, passionate about, and good in what they do with helping families. Especially families who are in a hard time. And so they've been wonderful to partner with, and I'm really excited to be part of what's going on there.
It's awesome. So this is all really cool stuff that we're talking about. And I feel like I don't want to be a pin in the balloon and pop the balloon here, but talking about the operational components. Okay. So to run a successful business, I know some of the things that you've tried, some of the things you've learned through mistakes, things of that nature. You're not naturally geared in that mindset, right? In the systems and the operations,
right?
And,
mm-hmm.
You didn't have a background in business management, as you said. That curriculum was nowhere to be found in your programs, and it shouldn't be, right? I mean, in educational programs for mental health, the focus should be mental health, right?
Yes.
So you learned a lot of your business knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. Tell us about how you've learned how to run a successful business.
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes I made for a long time is not scheduling in time to do the operations stuff. And so I would basically, like, if a client called and wanted a session, then I would just fill in all the space in a week. And then I'm left with like, oh my gosh, I'm behind on my notes, or I'm behind on my bookkeeping, or, any other number of things. And not that I don't still get behind on those things sometimes, but I schedule in time now. Like, today is my admin day. And so most of my day today will be spent taking care of those kinds of things. And that has been, that really changes things for me, because I'm not then either struggling to catch up or, working after hours to try and make up for the time that I didn't have meeting with clients. And it also makes it so that I am less, I'm not stretched too thin with meeting with a ton of clients and then also still having to take care of this other business.
So what are some systems that you use for managing your business? An example, I won't name it, I'll let you talk about it, but you have a method for managing your income and your taxes. And, what do you do around tax season? You mentioned catching up on your bookkeeping. Well, guess what? Therapists have to keep other types of books. Those are mental health records, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you do? What are your operational components to your business?
Yeah, so electronic health records has been a huge game changer. For a long time, I was on paper. That was one of the things that changed when I started Hopeful and Whole, is that I have electronic health records now, and that really helps keep me on track and have thorough notes and, all of those things. So that's been really, really great. As far as bookkeeping goes, I use QuickBooks. And another thing that I just held off on, because this is not my strength, is for a long time I did not connect my bank accounts to QuickBooks. I was like, I'll just manually put it all in, because it intimidated me to connect those things. But once I did connect it, I realized how much simpler it is now to just assign charges to different accounts in QuickBooks. And so and then, other operational things are going to be like, there's marketing, and there's and having meetings of various kinds. And then I also I have an intern now. And so supervision with her, reading over her notes and approving them, just other components that come along with that.
Yeah, so you mentioned your intern, and I think that was a major point of growth for your business. So, one day people will know more about what I do in my business as well. But something that we see when I'm working with clients is, somebody started their business. They got a successful business, and guess what? They need to grow, but they can't, because they're in the day-to-day, and they need to add staff, but they don't know who to hire. They don't know how to hire them, and they have to start thinking about new problems, new levels, different devils, right?
Right.
And so, we've been talking about that, right? Like in the last year, about what growth looks like for you. So you have a mighty intern, your first intern. And what does that look like? What's that journey been like, adding somebody to Hopeful and Whole? I mean, that's huge.
It's so huge, such a learning curve for me, because like I said, I've been doing this for such a long time without having to be responsible for anybody but myself. And even in working with the group practice for a time, so I was still not responsible. I was sort of accountable to others, but not responsible for anybody. And so I've realized that it's more work than I anticipated, which is fine. I'm actually really glad to do it. I'm enjoying it. But it means that I have to really hone in on my own professionalism. I have to sort of re-educate myself on some things that I've just been doing automatically for all these years, because I've been a therapist for 15 years. It's not easy, but it comes very naturally to me now. So I have to learn how to explain some things that I haven't had to explain to anybody before. and, explain my reasons for doing certain things, make sure I'm very ethical, which I have kept high ethical standards for myself, but I have to even take it to another level of ensuring my ethics and explaining why we do the things we do. And so yeah, it's been a very big learning experience for me, and it has shown me how much I enjoy it and how much I would like to continue to grow and bring on other therapists and train them as well.
Yeah, why don't you tell Kansas City and the world what you're looking for in a therapist to come and join your team? I mean,
my goodness.
I feel like I'm asking that question in advance in expectation of what's going to happen for your business. But that's the role that I take with everybody who's going to be coming on this podcast is, these are people that are doing awesome things. If they're not adding to their team right now, they're going to be adding to their team because their good work is being noticed. So tell everybody what you're looking for. What can aspiring mental health professionals develop if they want to get in this space and they want to do work with you?
Yeah, well, interns are in Kansas. It's different from the way it was in California. That's another thing I've had to learn about. Interns are students still. They're in school, and so most of them have had little to no training in perinatal mental health. And so, at the very minimum, start reading some books about the topic.
Which books?
Oh, goodness.
I'm sorry. You know what we'll do? We'll list those in the show notes,
okay.
Or we'll put them in a post. I apologize.
But there are a lot out there now. And
right, so read books.
You really, start reading some books about perinatal or maternal mental health, postpartum depression. Those are the topics to look for. So start reading some books, which I know is a lot because you're already in grad school, but they don't teach you about perinatal mental health in grad school. And so if this is an area of interest to you, you're going to have to start some of your own study. For those who have already graduated and are now able to practice, but supervised, then there are continuing education programs that you can look into, certification programs as well. There are a lot out there through Postpartum Support International, Marseille Society. There are several different organizations now offering these continuing education programs. And so, hop right on it and make that an area of focus for you, because that's what it's going to have to be. You have to be the person in charge of educating yourself on this, because it's just not part of graduate school curriculum.
That's outstanding. So what about, do you ever meet mental health professionals that have been working with certain folks for an extended amount of time and they want to make a switch? Like maybe there's a life event or something that comes up and inspires them to, get into doing what you do. Does that ever happen?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think so many of us are inspired by some sort of life event or some sort of situation we found ourselves in some point in our lives that we've been able to heal through, recover from, or not. Some of us are kind of still in it in some ways, and we are so often influenced by that in the areas we choose to go into, which I think it can make things a little more challenging in some ways emotionally, but is also hugely beneficial in that we have that perspective of having had a personal experience, and we can really empathize with our clients and maybe have some insight on things that somebody who hasn't gone through it maybe wouldn't have.
Yeah, as I'm hearing you talk about that, I'm wondering about, the leadership traits, right? Because you're learning this, right? You've known this in several different walks of life, but what you were talking about as you were getting your intern onboarded, you've had to think about explaining things that you haven't had to explain in years. I hear leadership when I hear that. So when we're talking about leadership, that's the thing. We've talked about this before. Accidental managers, they're people who are really good at the job. And so they got promoted to manage people that are going to be good at the job, or they're bringing them up to be good at the job, but they don't know how to be a leader. It's like a new muscle. It's a new track.
Right.
Leadership is totally different. So tell us about some of the leadership things that you've learned and that, you would encourage other people to develop?
Well, the number one is that I am taking a supervisor training right now. I am in smack dab in the middle of a 12-hour training to become an approved that's going to help me become an approved supervisor in the state of Kansas. And so that means, people who have graduated already and are starting to practice and need supervision before they get their clinical license, I will be able to supervise those people. So that training is teaching me a ton about leadership in this arena, because it's leadership in general. There are a lot of ways we can generalize leadership, but there are those specifics that come to being a leader of therapists in training.
What's most important for leaders of therapists to understand?
There's so many things. I don't know if I can even speak to what's most important. I think it's maybe self-reflection, having self-reflection and self-awareness, and being able to evaluate your own work. And again, those ethical pieces, those boundaries, and that level of professionalism that you really have to look at in yourself and evaluate honestly, so that you can improve those areas and pass those along to whoever you're training.
So how do you take on new clients? What are some steps you take when you're talking to a person who's interested in getting help?
I do a phone consultation, which is a little bit of an evaluation as well. We'll talk for 10 or 15 minutes over the phone. I have some standard questions that I ask because, again, the vast majority of the clients coming to me are experiencing some sort of reproductive challenge, whether that's having had a loss or they're postpartum or infertility. So I have some kind of standard questions I ask to evaluate where they're at. I ask about their support system. I always ask if they're having any thoughts that are concerning, because that's a really important piece that I need to know right up front in case this is an emergency situation. And then as long as it's a good fit, then we both agree on that, then we go ahead and get scheduled, and I send them out their, paperwork to fill out electronically. And that's that.
Awesome. Something that I noted earlier in the conversation that I wanted to make sure we came back to was when you were talking about having your own voice in your own company, your own marketing materials and all that. What do you like most about being an entrepreneur? Because you are an entrepreneur as well.
I am.
Yes, you are.
Yes. And what do I like most? I guess the freedom, which is so funny. We always, it's kind of a joke, like entrepreneurs are the only ones who will work 80 hours a week in order to not work 40 hours a week. Right. So I have that element of my business is always running. I could get a call at 10 p.m. if there's some sort of urgent issue, or I can get an inquiry for a new client inquiry on a Saturday, for example. But I also get to choose, unless it's an emergency, I also get to choose when and how I respond. And I do have the time freedom to make my own schedule, to choose what that's going to look like, to be able to, for example, pick my kids up from school 3 days a week and not have them in extended care every day of the week. And that feels really good to me, to be able to choose. I'm not going to work the weekends. I used to do that, and I don't do that anymore. And it's a process going from, I work on the evenings, I work on the weekends, and, all of those things to, I don't do that. I don't do that now. And now I have what feels to me like more freedom to choose. And, if, for example, I have a afternoon where everybody has canceled, I can choose to take my paddleboard down the road to the lake if I want to. And you can't do that in your 9-to-5 job. they don't let you do that. And so
I'd like to take a paddleboard break. I'm just going to put it on the calendar. Yeah. Manager sees this 4-hour block that's marked private.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was my paddleboard break. I'm so glad that you mentioned paddleboarding because selfishly, I had another question lined up. Sure. I am listening to you, but I do have an agenda here. What hobbies do you have? How do you keep yourself showing up whole, like bringing your whole self to, meeting with your clients? Something that, I don't know that we've really discussed here, but one of the dynamics I know that you've worked through is making sure you are bringing 100% of yourself to meet with your clients. And that is something that, I think everyone that's considering right now, those who aren't in it, those of you that are in it, you know it. But if you're considering a career in helping people through behavioral health services, you've got to bring your whole self there. And I know this from a standpoint of somebody who's supported therapists, supported nurses in previous lives, and watched my own wife go through this. Mm-hmm. So going back to the hobbies and, nothing like taking walks and things like that. Like, what do you do to, for fun?
Well, taking walks is one of my hobbies.
Sorry, just trying to be a top. I'm trying to get something big.
I love taking walks, and you're right.
It can be that simple.
Yes, and it really can be. And yes, the therapists, we have to bring our whole selves. It's very taxing work, which is why we also need to be thoughtful about how we take care of ourselves. And so you may not consider this a hobby, but I really care a lot about nutrition. And so I do it as a hobby in a sense. I'm always learning about nutrition and bringing new recipes into our home and trying to make things, more delicious so that our whole family can enjoy it and feel good. And I do really love walks and I love paddleboarding. We're getting close to the end of the season of being able to do that, but just being outside in general, it's really fun to have kids our ages because we can get out and play together, and go for walks or go exploring, go to, the nature center and go on hikes and stuff, and, camping when we get out to do it, all of those outdoors things.
Yeah, and just I was just kind of giggling when you said when we have kids our ages, and I was thinking our kids aren't as old as us, but
the ages of our children
that they are. So, I guess, is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to add to this conversation? I guess one of the things I was thinking about is there anything that you wish you knew when you got started that you've learned now?
Yeah, well, okay, so two things, because when you ask, is there anything else I wanted to discuss? Yep. I thought of, I don't know how this hasn't come up yet, but to add to sort of the freedom of having my own branding and my own values and whatnot, I also have the ability to, as a Christian, be able to offer Christian counseling, Christian therapy services, biblically based. And so I've done some additional training on that as well, and am continuing to do that. And that is a service that I can offer that I may not be able to if I were, say, working with a group practice or in some sort of a government agency or something. And it's really valuable, and it's not for everybody. It's not a requirement that people are Christians to come to see me. It's not a thing that I present unless it's asked for. But being able to offer that is really valuable for those who, that's part of a very important part of their worldview. And so having that freedom is wonderful. And then was the second thing, like what I wish I had known? Is that what you asked? Okay. What I wish I had known in the beginning was that my personality is extremely important to the bringing in the clients that I'm going to work best with. I think some things, again, have really shifted with this digital age from when I started 15 years ago, when social media was not really a thing and there was very little talk even about, how do we manage social media and clients and how we present ourselves. And we were trained to be very quiet about and very neutral with our personal views, which is still important, I think, in the therapy session. And at the same time, when it comes to marketing and comes to sharing myself to the world and allowing them to decide whether or not they're going to work with me, it really matters who I am and who they see, and what my values are again, and the things that I find interesting. People care about that now, and so that's been a big shift for me. But it's really helpful now for me to know how much that does matter, and that it's okay then for me to just be myself, essentially.
Absolutely. So many great points there. I guess when you talk about being yourself and you find somebody who may not be a fit for Hopeful and Whole for a multitude of reasons, but I think generally, maybe they're looking for they have different goals in mind, or there's somebody who has a specialization that is going to benefit that client more. How do you do that referral process? And how, because we know, like, you can't just like send a name. What's your process for getting folks to the right people here in Kansas City? How do you care for people when you can't care for people?
Yeah. So it's the standard is to make 3 referrals, to give them 3 different options that they could choose from that might meet their needs. And, really great care would be to get in contact with another therapist and say, hey, do you have openings? Would you be able to take this client? That's not always possible from time constraints and whatnot, but at the very minimum, providing them with 3 referrals that would be potentially a better fit for them.
Excellent. So we've talked about a lot. I really appreciate you just taking the time to do this interview and share a side that you've been working on in the shadows. I mean, everybody gets to see that you're a therapist and the types of folks that you're helping out. What a lot of people don't see is all the hard work and all of the blood, sweat, and tears, behind the scenes. So I'm glad that everybody got to hear more about that today. How can people get in touch with you? How can they engage with Hopeful and Whole?
You can find me on my website at hopefulandwhole.com. And then there are 2 different Instagrams. There is Hopeful and Whole Counseling, which is the representative of the whole group, which, like I've talked about, we'll hopefully be adding more. And then there is my individual but professional Instagram, which is stephanie.hopefulandwhole.
Okay. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Michael, thank you.
It's been awesome having you on the show today. With that, we're going to go ahead and close up the podcast here. Again, thank you for tuning in to the Kansas City Business Cast. This is Michael Reisinger. Remember to like, share, subscribe, do all those things. And if you could, leave us a review. We'd really appreciate it.